shipwrecked and bleeding on the riverbank. A Lakota chief carried her home and gave her shelter at last. I keep a blanket on the peg by the door. My granddaughter asks about it sometimes. She'll tug at the fringe and look up at me, and I never know what to tell her that she'd understand. It's old. The elk hide is soft where her fingers rub it. There is a patch along the lower edge, a different shade, where the original was sliced through. I did that repair myself, years ago, with sinew and a bone needle, kneeling by a fire in a lodge I don't live in anymore. She doesn't know any of that. She just knows it hangs by the door, and I never let it lie on the floor. So I tell her that was a cold winter, and I leave it there. But tonight the fire is low, and the house is quiet, and everybody else is asleep. And I've been sitting here holding a cup I stopped drinking from an hour ago, and I'll tell it the way it actually went. The way I've never said aloud to anyone, because there was never anyone who needed to hear it. The river was running fast that October. Too fast. The rains had come early and hard that year, driving up from the south, and by the time they reached the Missouri country, everything that was a creek was a river, and everything that was a river was a problem. I'd seen it before. I'd seen wagons pushed sideways in crossings, oxen go under without a sound, wheels spin against the current like the water was making a point. We were 3 days out from the winter camp, my brother Chask and 2 younger men, Motto and Elk Runner, scouting the eastern rim of our territory. It wasn't a war party. It was a walking through, same as we did every year before the snow locked everything down. You go out and you look. You know what's changed, what's moved, what's gone wrong, and you come home and you know. My father did it. His father did it. It was just the thing you did. We came down through a stand of box elder to the river around midday. The water was the color of old iron, and it was loud, moving fast, like I said, and there was a flatboat in it. Not moving the way a boat moves, moving the way a thing moves when nobody's steering it anymore. It was already broken. I could see one side had stove in, maybe hit a rock upriver, maybe just gave way under the weight of whatever it was carrying. Boxes, barrels, what looked like furniture lashed to the deck. Someone had been trying to take a whole life across that water, and the river had said no. There were people on it, 2 men I could see, hauling at something, shouting at each other. And then the front of it swung sideways and the whole thing tipped, and I couldn't see them after that. Chask put his hand on my arm. He'd seen it too. We came down to the bank at a run. By the time we got there, the boat was a wreck against a gravel bar maybe 40 yards downstream, half out of the water, half in it, turning slow. One of the men was clinging to what was left of the railing. The other I never saw again. There was luggage in the water, a spinning chair, a crate of something that had burst open, and there was a woman on the near bank in the shallows on her hands and knees. She hadn't made it all the way out. Her legs were still in the current and the water was pushing at her, and she didn't have the strength to pull herself the rest of the way. Her hair was plastered down across her face. Her dress, heavy wool, was soaked through, and it was working against her, holding water, pulling her back toward the current every time she tried to move. She was bleeding. I could see it from where I stood, her right hand down her cheek, from something she'd hit or something that had hit her. She was not young, not old either, maybe 35, maybe a little more. I went into the water. I wasn't thinking about it, I just went. The cold hit me like a slap, the kind of cold that makes you stupid for a moment, makes your hands into wood. I got to her in about 4 steps, reached down and got my arm under her and pulled her up and out of the river. She didn't fight me. She was past fighting. I dragged her up onto the dry gravel, and she just collapsed against me, coughing. And I held her weight and stood there while the river went on past us both like it had somewhere more important to be. She was shaking hard. The shaking was good. The shaking meant she was still working. I set her down on a rock above the waterline. She looked up at me. Her eyes were gray, not scared anymore or past scared, which isn't the same thing. She said something I didn't catch, water still coming out of her with every word. Then she passed out. We got the man off the wreck. He was the husband. Once he was on the bank and could stand and could see that she was breathing, He went to pieces in a way that men do sometimes when the danger's already over and there's nothing left to fight. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder, and he sat down in the gravel and put his hands over his face and shook. I let him. Her name was Margaret. That's all I got from him before she started shaking again, the deep kind that's the body trying to stay warm when it's running out of road. I had the blanket off my back and around her before I'd thought about it. It was the best one I owned at that time, doeskin, elk tallow dressed, with quillwork along the top edge that my wife Winona had done the winter before she died. I'd been carrying it for 2 years. I'd slept under it and I'd wrapped it around myself 100 times, and I knew exactly how heavy it was and how it smelled and where every seam was. I put it around the woman Margaret, and I tucked it under her arms, and she put her hand on my wrist without looking at me. Just her hand on my wrist for a moment. Then it went slack and she was under again. Chask looked at me over her head. He didn't say anything. He had a face that did a lot of talking without words, my brother, and what it said right then was, "Now what?" The answer was obvious, even if the complications weren't. We couldn't leave them there. The weather was coming, I could smell it, that particular iron cold that meant hard frost before midnight and real snow within a day. The husband wasn't going to be able to walk far and definitely wasn't going to be able to carry her. They had nothing. Everything on that boat was gone or going. The nearest white settlement was maybe 4 days east, and there was no getting there before the weather came down. The nearest shelter was our winter camp, 3 days with good weather, maybe 4, carrying a woman who couldn't walk. I told Chask to go back, get horses, bring tall grass woman who knew medicine, and not to tell anyone more than he had to. He looked at me another long moment, then he went. We spent that night in a rock shelter I knew in the hills above the river. Not big, barely room for all of us. The fire small because the husband didn't know how to feed one, and I was too busy keeping the woman upright to teach him. Her name was Margaret Cross. Her husband was Henry. They'd been heading west, which was what everyone was doing that year, each of them for reasons that were no doubt sensible when they were back east and hadn't yet met a flooded October river. Henry Cross sat close to his wife all night and watched her breathe. He glanced at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. He had that white man calculation in his face, the one where they're trying to decide what I'm going to do, what I want, whether they're in more danger now than they were in the river. I'd seen that look my whole life. I didn't blame him for it. I just didn't have any energy to put toward reassuring him. Margaret woke around midnight. She was confused at first, looked around the shelter like she was trying to find something she'd lost, then seemed to arrive back in her own body and stop looking. She took stock. The fire, her husband, me across the fire, the blanket still around her. She said, "I know you." I didn't answer. "No," she said. "I mean you were in the water, you pulled me out." "Yes." She looked at the blanket. She ran her thumb across the quillwork at the edge, the same way my granddaughter does now, 40 years later. "Is this yours?" It was. She looked up at me then, really looked, the kind of looking that isn't trying to calculate anything, that's just trying to see. "Thank you," she said, and then she fell asleep again, sitting up, her head going slowly sideways onto her husband's shoulder. Henry Cross looked at me over her head. "Thank you," he said too. It came out rough, like the words had been wedged somewhere and he'd had to work to get them free. "I don't know your name." "Mato Sapa," I said, sitting bare. He tried it, got it wrong but not badly wrong. "Henry Cross," he said like I didn't know already. Then, "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere warm," I said. "Sleep." He didn't sleep, but he stopped asking questions, which was close enough. Chask came back with the horses and tall grass woman on the second morning. He'd brought 4 horses, which meant he'd thought it through. Good man, my brother, good thinker. Tall grass woman looked at Margaret Cross for about 30 seconds and then looked at me with an expression I knew. This woman is in trouble, but she'll live if you're not stupid about it. Then she looked at the cut on Margaret's face, which had stopped bleeding but had gone an ugly color, and she went into her pack and started working. Margaret Cross let herself be tended. She had that quality some people have, where being cared for doesn't insult them. They don't fight it or deflect it. They just receive it with a kind of plain dignity. She sat very still while tall grass woman cleaned the cut and pressed a poultice against her cheek and wrapped a band of soft skin around her head to hold it. She watched tall grass woman's hands with something like attention, the way you watch someone who knows what they're doing. Tall grass woman said something, not to Margaret, just generally. She says the bone is whole, I translated. Margaret nodded. Tell her I know it doesn't feel broken. A pause. Tell her thank you. I did. Tall grass woman grunted and kept working. Henry Cross had gotten himself together overnight. He was the kind of man who gets worse before he gets better and then is better than before. He'd processed whatever fear and shame and helplessness he'd been swamped with, and now he was standing straight and watching everything and asking what he could carry. I gave him a pack. He took it without looking at the weight. We put Margaret on a horse. She rode without complaint, though I could see every hour in her face. By midday the sky had gone that flat white that means business, and by late afternoon the snow was coming down in earnest. Big soft flakes at first, then smaller and meaner. We stopped early and I built a proper fire and we ate, and Margaret Cross ate, and nobody talked much. I sat apart from them that night, as I usually did. I had my own thoughts to keep. It had been 2 years since Winona died, and I had gotten accustomed to a particular kind of quiet, the kind that's not peaceful, just empty, and these people had disrupted it. Not badly, just the way any presence disrupts a silence you've come to rely on. I sat outside the wind shadow of the rock shelf where we'd camped and looked at the snow coming down in the dark and thought about nothing in particular. After a while I heard someone coming through the snow. I didn't turn. I knew from the sound it wasn't Chask. Margaret Cross came around where I could see her. She was wrapped in the doeskin blanket and she was moving carefully because her legs were still not right from the cold. She didn't say anything. She just lowered herself onto the rock beside me slowly and sat there. The snow came down. She said, "Is this your land?" "Yes." "Have you lived here long?" "All my life, my father's life, his father's." She was quiet for a moment, then, "We were going to Oregon." "I know. Henry thinks we can still get there in the spring." I didn't say anything to that. "I think," she said more slowly, "that this winter is going to change something. I don't know what yet." I looked at her. She was looking at the snow. There was something in her face that wasn't fear and wasn't gratitude and wasn't the calculation Henry had been doing. It was something closer to the face of a person who has had a very close look at their own mortality and come back from it still thinking. "Go back inside," I said. "You're not warm enough." She didn't argue. She got up and went. But before she did, she touched the edge of the blanket where the quillwork was, just briefly, and she said, "Someone loved making this." "Yes," I said, "she did." She went back inside. I sat with the snow another hour. We came into the winter camp on the afternoon of the 4th day. I should say, I had not planned for this. I am a man who thinks ahead, who reads weather and terrain and the behavior of men, who rarely finds himself in a situation he hasn't at least considered from a distance. But I had not considered this one. I had not thought, before I went into that river, about what came after. I'd thought about the woman in the current and nothing else. The camp was big that year. Close to 300 people in the skin lodges and bark lodges along the creek. Fires going, dogs, children, the smell of meat and smoke and horses. It was as much home as I had ever known, and I rode into it with a white man and a white woman behind me and felt every set of eyes in the place come to rest on us. I didn't stop. I rode to my own lodge and got down and helped Margaret Cross down from the horse, and she stood in the snow looking at the camp with that thinking face of hers, not afraid exactly, but very, very present. Tall grass woman spoke quietly beside me. She said, "Your lodge isn't large enough for 3. I knew that. Take her to your lodge," I said. "She needs warmth and someone who can watch her through the night. I'll deal with everything else." The everything else was considerable. There were people who thought I had lost my mind. There were 2 men, Crow Feather and an older man named Standing Cloud, who came to me that night and told me without gentleness that bringing white settlers into the camp was a different order of problem than anything I was treating it as. That it would cause talk. That it would cause more than talk. That the thing I was thinking of doing, wintering them here, letting them stay through the cold, was the kind of decision that became a problem for everyone, not just for me. I heard them out. I gave them coffee, which I had, and they drank it and made their case, and I sat with it. They weren't wrong about the complications. They were right about the talk, right about the trouble that could come. Everything they said was true and reasonable. But I had a woman bleeding in the river in my head, and I had a blanket I'd given away, and I was going to see this through. I said, "They stay through the winter. In the spring they go wherever they go. Anyone who has a real problem with that can take it up with me, and I'll hear it." Crow Feather looked at me for a long time. He was not a small man, and he wasn't accustomed to being answered flatly. But he knew me, and he knew what the flat answer meant, and he left. Standing Cloud stayed a moment longer. He was old enough to have seen a great deal, and his face carried it. He looked at me and he said, in a tone that wasn't quite a question, "Is it about the woman?" I said, "It's about what's right." He nodded slowly, like that was worth something but not quite worth everything. Then he left too. The winter was long. Not cruel, not that year, not the way some winters go, but long and cold and steady, the way the good ones are. The creek froze hard by the end of November. The horses stayed close to the camp. Everyone moved slow and deliberate and careful, the way you move when the cold is a real thing you're always keeping account of. Margaret Cross healed fast. She was a strong woman in a way that didn't announce itself, no bravado, no demonstration, just the evidence of it. By the 2nd week she was up and moving around Tall Grass Woman's lodge, helping with what she could. By the 3rd week she was outside for part of each day, getting her legs back under her. Her face healed cleanly. The cut left a thin scar along one cheekbone that I thought, when I saw it in certain light, looked like it had always been there. Henry Cross was another matter. He was a good man, let me say that plainly. He was honest and he worked hard and he had no cruelty in him. But he was not comfortable in stillness. He needed to be doing, and he didn't always know what to do, and the not knowing made him restless, and the restlessness made him clumsy in ways that created problems. He chopped firewood until he had too much. He tried to help mend a harness and made it worse. He watched everything with big serious eyes, and wanted badly to be useful and often wasn't. I set him to work where it wouldn't matter if he made mistakes, carrying water, keeping the path to the creek clear of snow, tasks that needed more muscle than skill. He took them with a seriousness that was almost touching. Margaret was different. She watched, the way her husband watched, but she was learning something where he was storing something up. She started spending time near the women who were working hides, just watching at first, then quietly asking Tall Grass Woman to show her a step, then another. Her Lakota was nothing, 3 words, then 5, then 10, but Tall Grass Woman had better English than she let most people know, and between them they managed. I don't know exactly when I started watching for Margaret Cross in the mornings. I noticed it when I noticed it, which was sometime in December. I'd come out of my lodge at first light and I'd look toward Tall Grass Woman's lodge, and some part of me would track whether the flap was moving, whether she was up yet, whether I could see the thin smoke of the fire that meant they were awake. I'm not sure what I thought I was doing. I told myself it was caution, that I'd brought her here and I was responsible for her, and it was right to keep account of her. That is what I told myself. The truth is that she was the most fully present person I had been around in 2 years, not performing, not managing anyone, just there in whatever she was doing with all of herself. It was something I had forgotten could exist. It had been so long. Christmas, the white people kept. I had seen it before, the attempt to remember, when you're a long way from everything the day is supposed to contain. Henry Cross made a point of it quietly, without making it anyone else's business. Margaret sat with him in the evening and they talked in low voices, and she held his hand for a long time. I could see them from across the camp, through the gap in two lodges, just the shape of them together in the lamplight. I went about my own business. There were things to keep track of that winter that had nothing to do with the two white strangers in my camp. Disputes to settle. A young man named Lean Wolf who'd gotten himself into something with a man from another band and needed it smoothed before it became something that couldn't be smoothed. A horse that had gone lame in a way nobody could account for. The usual weight of it, the thing that doesn't stop because the season has changed or because you have other things on your mind. One night in December, I came back late from settling the Lean Wolf business, and I found Margaret Cross sitting outside my lodge in the dark. She was wrapped in the doeskin blanket. She had it back. Tall grass woman had dried it and returned it at some point, and Margaret had started keeping it in the lodge with her. She stood up when I came near. "You've been gone 3 days," she said. "There was something to take care of." "Is it taken care of?" "For now." She nodded. She looked like she had more to say and was deciding whether to say it. "In the end," she said, "there was a disagreement here while you were gone. 2 men. I don't know what about. It got loud." "Was anyone hurt?" "No, Chas came and it stopped." "Good." Henry tried to help and made it worse. I almost smiled at that. Yes, he would. She looked at me for a moment. "You have a lot to carry," she said, "all of this." "It's my camp." "I know," a pause. "I just mean I see it, how much it is." Nobody said things like that to me. Not because they didn't know, plenty of people knew, but because it wasn't the kind of thing that was said. You carried what you carried and nobody named it. The naming of it was strange, and it sat in me strange, uncomfortably close to something I didn't have a name for myself. I said, "Go inside, it's cold." She went. I stood outside my lodge for a while longer in the dark, listening to the camp and the wind. January was the hard month. A man from the Eastern Band came in with news that wasn't good. Traders moving up the river earlier than usual, more of them, with something behind them that we all understood the shape of. I spent 3 days in council with the older men, and we said the same things we always said, which were true and which changed nothing. The world was moving in a direction we couldn't stop, and we all knew it, and the knowing had a particular kind of weight. I came back from those 3 days tired in a way that went down to the bone. I went to my lodge and sat down and put my hands on my knees and looked at the fire. After a while the lodge flap opened and Margaret Cross came in. She had a clay bowl. She set it down in front of me. Broth, something tall grass woman had been cooking. "Eat," she said. I looked up at her. "Tall grass woman said to bring this," she said. "And she said to tell you that you don't eat enough when you're thinking." I ate. She sat across the fire from me, not talking, just there. I ate the whole bowl. I hadn't realized I was hungry until the smell of it hit me. When I put the bowl down, she said, "Is it very bad, what they told you?" I looked at her. I thought about how to answer. "It's the kind of bad you can see coming for a long time," I said, "which doesn't make it less bad, just different." She nodded. She didn't try to make it better. She didn't say anything reassuring. She just nodded, like the answer was real and she was taking it seriously. I said, "Your husband, he wants to go to Oregon." "Yes. In the spring. That's what he wants." "And you?" She looked at the fire for a long moment. "I want to go to Oregon," she said. "I think that's different." I didn't push at it. I let it sit. She looked up at me. "May I ask you something?" "Yes." "The quill work on the blanket. You said someone loved making it. I said nothing. Your wife, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. How long ago did she die? 2 years, the winter before last. She didn't say she was sorry, she said, what was she like? And I told her, I don't know why. I had not talked about Winona to anyone in 2 years, not in any real way, not the way you talk about someone you loved, just the facts when the facts were necessary. But there was something in this woman's face, that particular quality of attention she had, that made the words come. I told her how Winona had moved, the way she was quick when she was interested and still when she was thinking, the sound of her laughing at something she found genuinely funny, which was a sound I could still hear exactly if I tried, the quill work and how her hands looked doing it, the particular way she would put her hand on my arm when she wanted to tell me something without words. Margaret Cross listened to all of it without moving. When I stopped, she said, very quietly, "She sounds like she was exactly what you needed." She was, I said. She was what I had and what I needed and what I didn't think I could live without. But you did. Yes, you live through the things you think you can't. That's almost the whole of it. She looked at the fire again, then at me. She said, "Thank you for telling me." I looked at her. The firelight on her face and the doe-skin blanket around her shoulders and the thin scar along her cheek that was part of her face now, just like anything else. I said, "Thank you for asking." She got up and went back to her own lodge. I sat with the fire for a long time after. February. The cold had gotten pure by then. Not vicious, just absolute, the kind of cold that makes everything sharp and clear, that takes out all the slack. You move when you need to and you stay still the rest of the time and you don't waste anything. Henry Cross had found his use by February. It had taken him a while, but he'd gotten there. There was a man in camp, old Hunts Alone, who was the best horse handler I'd ever known and who had been watching Henry with the horses and had apparently decided he was worth teaching. I would come around the horse enclosure in the morning and find Hunts Alone showing Henry something with his hands, speaking slowly, and Henry watching with every bit of his attention, nodding, trying it. Hunts Alone had no patience for stupidity, but a great deal of patience for genuine effort, and Henry Cross was nothing if not genuinely earnest. I watched this from a distance for a few days before Henry came to me and said, carefully, that he thought he might be able to trade for passage west in the spring, that he'd heard some of the men talking about a trading party heading south in April, and if there was a way to connect to a westbound party from there. I told him I would ask about it. He nodded. He said, "I know this hasn't been easy. You didn't have to do this." "No," I said. He looked at me straight. He said, "I won't forget it." He said it simply, like a man making a record of something, not a performance, just a statement. "Go eat," I said. "Hunts Alone wants you back with the horses this afternoon." He almost smiled. "He told you that?" "He told Chask. Chask told me." He went. That night I told Chask to put out word quietly about the April trading party. Chask said he already had. I looked at him. He looked back at me, innocent as winter air. "How long ago?" I said. 3 weeks, he said. I said nothing. He said, "I thought you'd get there eventually." I went to my lodge. There was a night in late February that I have thought about more times than anything else that winter. More than the river, more than the councils, more than the cold. I'd been out late checking the horses. One of them, a gray mare I valued, had been restless and I wanted to see her myself. By the time I came back, the camp was quiet, and most of the fires were banked, and it was very late, probably 2 hours before first light. Margaret Cross was at the creek. She was there for the same reason anyone was there at that hour, the same reason I went to the river sometimes when I couldn't sleep. She was just standing at the edge of the ice, looking at the black water where it moved too fast to freeze, in the middle of the creek. She had the doe-skin blanket around her and she was standing very still. I came up beside her. She didn't startle. We stood there for a while without talking. She said, I dreamed about it again. The river. The crossing. Yes, the water, the weight of the dress. She paused. In the dream, I don't get out. You did get out. I know. She turned and looked at me. This close and this dark with just the creek light and the snow, her face was very plain. No performance in it at all. I know I did, because of you. I didn't say anything. She said, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to tell it right. Tell it wrong, then. She looked at me for a moment, then. When I was in the water, when I couldn't get up the bank, I had already let go of it, the bank. I wasn't fighting anymore. I don't think I was going to make it, and then there you were. She paused. I know that sounds like gratitude. I know you know I'm grateful, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I waited. I'm trying to say that the thing you gave me wasn't just being pulled out. It was everything after. It was this winter. The way Tall Grass Woman taught me things, and the way Chask talks to Henry like he's a person, and the way you spoke to me at the fire that night about Winona. She stopped. You gave me my life back, but you also gave me this, whatever this has been, and I don't know what to do with it. The creek moved. I said, what does Henry think? Henry loves me, she said immediately. That's not what I know he loves me, and I love him. That's not the question. What's the question? She looked at the water. The question is how you live after something like this, how you carry it. Whether you're still going west, or whether something changed. I thought about that. I thought about Winona and 2 years of empty, and the particular kind of weight I'd been carrying since. And I thought about this woman standing at a creek in February, asking the kind of question I'd been asking myself since October. I thought about how presence works, how it's the rarest thing, and how you don't always know what you've been missing until it's right in front of you. I said, you go west. That's the answer. You go where the life is that you chose, and you carry the rest of it with you because it's yours now and it'll make you different, and that's all right. She looked at me. Is that what you did after Winona? I kept going, I said. I'm not sure that's the same thing. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. Just her hand on my arm, the way she'd done it in the river without knowing she was doing it, with her strength mostly gone. But not like that now. Present and deliberate. She said, you're a good man, Mato Sapa. You are the best man I have ever met in my life, and I mean that the way it sounds, and I wanted you to hear it. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face. I said, go back inside, I mean it. She almost smiled. She took her hand back and pulled the blanket close and turned and went. I stood at the creek another hour. I thought about all of it. About what she'd said and what I'd said and what neither of us had said. And I thought about the difference between the thing that is true and the thing that is right. And I thought about Winona, who would have had something sharp and accurate to say about all of it. And I thought about Oregon and spring, and about what it means to give a person their life back and then let them go live it. By the time I went to my lodge, I knew all of it, and it was still dark. The April trading party was a group of 6 men heading south to the trading post on the Laramie River. I'd made arrangements, Chask had made them really, and I'd confirmed them, for the crosses to ride with them as far as the post, where they could connect with a westbound party. The morning they left was early, cold still, but with the smell of something coming in the air, that green mud smell that means the ice is going to start moving within the week. Henry Cross shook my hand. He held it a moment, both hands around it, before he let go. He tried to say something and stopped. I nodded. Tall Grass Woman stood with Margaret Cross for a long time, talking in the combination of words and gestures they developed over the winter. I could see Margaret was crying quietly without making anything of it. Tall Grass Woman pressed something into her hands, a small bundle, something useful for the road. Margaret put her arms around her and held on. Tall Grass Woman let herself be held, which was not something she did easily. Then Margaret Cross came to me. She was wearing the doeskin blanket. She had worn it all winter, and it was hers by now in every way that use makes something yours. She reached up and undid it from her shoulders and held it out to me. "No," I said. "Yes," she said. "I know what it is, that's why." I looked at her. She said she'd want you to have it back. "I think that's true, and I want you to have it back." A pause, something to keep you company through the rest of it. I took it from her, the weight of it familiar as anything I owned. She put both her hands on my face, right there in front of whoever was watching Chask, hunts alone, half the camp probably. She put her hands on my face and looked at me straight, and what was in her face was not what I'd worried about at the creek in February. It was something older than that. Something like what stands between people who have gone through something hard together and come out the other side of it with their respect for each other whole. She said, "Don't forget you're worth this, that you have always been worth this. Don't let the hard things tell you otherwise." Then she kissed my forehead, the way a woman does when she means something that doesn't have a word, and she stepped back and turned and got on the horse and rode south with her husband without looking back. I stood there with the blanket in my hands. I stood there until they were out of sight, and then I stood there a little longer. Chask came up beside me. He didn't say anything for a while, then he said, "She was something." "Yes," I said. "Good woman." "Yes." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Are you all right?" I looked at the place on the trail where they'd gone around the bend and disappeared into the cottonwood. "I will be," I said. He nodded. He went back to the camp. I stood there another minute, holding the doeskin blanket and listening to the creek, which was already starting to loosen up, starting to move with a little more authority now that the cold was thinking about leaving. The ice along the edges had gone gray and soft. A red-tailed hawk was working the thermals high up, just a speck, circling. I put the blanket around my shoulders. And I went back to work. That was a long time ago now, 40 years. The world that winter camp was part of is almost entirely gone, not completely, but almost, in the ways that matter. The creek is still there. The plains are still there. But the camp is not, and most of the people in it are not, and the life we were living was already the last of itself without our knowing. I knew some of it. The trading party news, the shape of what was coming. I knew it abstractly. But you don't know it the way you'll know it later when later arrives. Margaret Cross wrote to me, once about 2 years after that winter. The letter came through channels that were complicated and it took a long time. She was in Oregon. She and Henry had made it. She had a daughter. She was well. The scar on her cheek, she wrote, had gone very pale and her daughter touched it sometimes the same way she'd touched the blanket, with curiosity, not worry. She said she thought about that winter, about Tall Grass Woman, about my camp. She said she thought about what I'd told her at the creek, about carrying things with you because they're yours now. I wrote back. It took me a long time to do it and the letter was short. I said, "I am glad you got there." I said, "The blanket is on the peg by the door." I don't know if she got it. I never heard again. The world we were in had already changed several times over by then, and letters were harder than they'd been. My granddaughter has her mother's eyes and her great-grandmother's hands, which is to say, Winona's hands. When she touches the quillwork on the blanket, I watch her fingers and I think of Winona making it, stitch by stitch, in the lamplight, humming something I still know all the words to. I think of Margaret Cross's thumb on the edge of the blanket on a cold night in October on a rock above the river, just after she came back to herself, the first thing she reached for when she had herself back. There's a patch along the lower edge where the hide was cut. I did that repair myself. I said that already. It was damaged in February, snagged on something at the creek that night, torn along the bottom seam. I took it to pieces and stitched it back together with sinew and a bone needle over 2 evenings, kneeling by my fire. The patch doesn't match exactly. Different tanning, different shade. But the seam is tight, and it's held through 40 winters, and it will hold through more. Things can be mended. That's what the patch means if it means anything. Not made new, not made like they were, just mended and held together by the work you put into them and still useful and still there. I put down the cup I stopped drinking from an hour ago. The fire is almost nothing now. The house is quiet. I'll put out the lamp in a minute. I'll walk past the peg by the door on my way. I always put my hand on the blanket when I pass it. The doeskin is warm from the room, and the quillwork is smooth under my fingers, and I know every stitch of it, where Winona's hand went and where mine did, and what was lost and what was kept. And then I'll go to sleep.